the fact. You see what I mean? In other words, saying this is almost saying too much. Just saying this, and then whether or not it is sort of, the philosophers can debate till the end of time. But this simple, event, whatever. And then being with that nakedly, then you can derive all sorts of things you want. You can say, well, yeah, I'm noticing that in actuality it's much more sort of like it's much more like spontaneously being done than something that I'm used to that I'm doing, like I'm used to holding it. And you can make all these kinds of extrapolations, but you're extrapolating from the fact rather than assuming that those extrapolations are necessarily included in the fact. So the point is just be with the event nakedly, be with this one fact, this presence, what we call experience, just this presence. Be with it as it is, unqualifiedly, that's all. And notice that the way we're usually with it, perhaps, often, is very qualified with all sorts of overlays of worldviews and understandings and presuppositions about space and time and entities and actions and cause and effect and history and all these other things, that in actuality, the fact itself does not support. It may not contradict, but it does not directly, necessarily imply those things. So just this, that's all.
No cognition necessary.
No, and even cognition is an extrapolation. Yeah. Even perception is an extrapolation. There's the fact. I mean, I call it presence, and I'm not sure whether or not that's too much. It seems pretty bare bones. And then you can say, yeah, it seems like it's a cognition, it seems like it's appearing to some awareness or perceiving faculty, blah, 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 and you can then elaborate from the event, which is fine, but go to the event first and then elaborate from there rather than building on past worldviews with the assumption that they have a leg to stand on. You see what I mean? So when you come to this, you can say, yeah, it seems like there's an awareness. It seems like this is a perception. It seems like there is some miraculous perceiving faculty inherent in this. It seems like, you can extrapolate all that stuff, but still you're clearly extrapolating, and this itself doesn't require the extrapolations. It doesn't rest on anything other than itself. So, and just be with that, that's all. Which, of course, you are already. So, just notice that. Just notice it.
I find myself recognizing conception and extrapolation.
Sure.
And then I notice that a lot of times I'll have a memory of when I had a very clear seeing and a very clear moment, and I'll try to bring up that moment and try to vivify that moment, but it was a moment of a while ago.
Sure.
And so I wonder if you could speak to kind of that dynamic.
Yeah. Well, I would say the important thing is not to not have extrapolations, not to not have memories, not to not have these kinds of events, but notice that they are what they are, which is, mental events or events in fantasy or whatever. And then we have the interesting condition that all of these mental events are actuality. They are this. So even when you have a memory of some past clarity that you're trying to recreate, that memory is actually present clarity because it exists. It is this. So it is a representation of the present clarity of this in the guise of masquerading as a memory, as an interpretation, as something you're trying to recapture, or and maybe even thinking you're failing to recapture, or whatever, right? Even while paradoxically it is the thing itself that you are trying to recapture. I mean, it's very slippery, because confusion and interpretation, of course, is this naked actuality. Just that's what it is. It's what it's made of. It's the only thing it consists of whatsoever. So it's not a matter of suppressing anything or not going into extrapolation or not going into memory. Just recognize that it is memory, that it is extrapolation, that it is conceptual thought, and as such, it is itself immediately present, transcendental presence, like anything and everything, if anything and everything.
So exists, right?
And we get to have a little fun with it, You don't need to be a Puritan. You don't need to be a total asshole, You don't need to, I have to sit here and say, I must not have memory, time does not exist, You become some kind of a neo-Nazi, Puritan thisite, It's like, you don't need to, because this, by its very nature, already is everything and anything. So there's nothing forbidden. There's no holds barred. There's nothing excluded. There's nowhere you can't go, because you never depart from this. But this has infinite modes in which it can be itself. Among major of which is confusion, memory, delusion, extrapolation, believing fantasies to be actual. All these other things are actually nothing whatsoever other than the native modes and the native presentations of this itself. So nothing departs from it. No, there are no sins against this. There are no transgressions or departures from, or violations of the sanctity of this. It's bulletproof. It's omnivorous. It's a black hole. It's already eaten everything.
You're sure? Positive about that.
The event speaks for itself. It doesn't depend on my positivity.
So when you're mentioning, when I was dreaming a couple of nights ago, and I don't generally remember my dreams. It was like while the dream was happening, I was aware the dream was happening. And I was like waking up and going, oh my gosh, I actually remember this dream, because it was really exhilarated.
Mm-hmm.
My body was just I was like totally excited and exhilarated. And I was like, whoa, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And I remembered some of the facts of the dream, but
Mm-hmm.
it didn't seem as important as the feeling.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
When I'm trying to hold that up against just this, is that the same as a memory, or is it it's happening in dreams? How do you describe dream state in relationship to that?
Well, it's no relationship. Dream state is this. Dream state recognized as dream state is this. Dream state not recognized as dream state, and where you're deluded and sucked into the dream and forgetting it, is this. So all of these are modes of this. But practically speaking, the more you have the ability, the random and miraculous ability to notice that fact, to notice the inclusiveness, the luckier you are, let's say. So, yeah. In other words, everything is nothing other than a version of actuality. But the more that this recognizes itself, recognizes that that is the case, the less entrapped you will feel in apparent limitation and apparent circumstances and apparent stuckness and apparent problems, And the more you will feel a sense of transcendence and liberation and light and joy and the life force and so on and so forth. Which, practically speaking, is what the whole spiritual fuss is about. But then the knack of stumbling onto that basically boils down to luck, karma. But if you find yourself where you are, what I call noticing, which is just having some awareness that as these conditions present themselves, they are this, to any extent, there's some degree of noticing that they are this inherent amazing fact, then that is evidence of being more intimately with your identity with this event and with identity, your identity with transcendence.
It starts to get that. I mean, I'm just also thinking. When I was aware, like I'm eating, and I'm going, okay, this tastes good. I like this. I don't like this. It's
Sure.
the same with with a person. I'm like, I want to go towards them. I want to go away from them.
Sure.
With a personality, I have a perspective on, or something on or not. It's all of that. Right?
Yeah. It's inclusive. There's nothing excluded. It's all just different modes of this doing what it does. What we call life being life. Again, life being life turns out to be astounding and astoundingly different than we usually think it is. We think of it in small and limited and paltry and problematic terms, and this, all I'm talking about is noticing that in actuality the way it really exists completely transcends any of those ways of thinking of it, and then you find yourself being able to be with it outside of the context of that smallness and that limitation and that problematic sort of a flavor. It's not about the event. The event is all the same, either one way or the other. It is what it is. Yeah, it's just seeing that all our problems are caused by our interpretations, and seeing that that's the case frees us from the problems. It's that simple. We define our problems, we define our limitations into existence, and when you see that, then you can be free of those definitions and free of problems. It just happens to be that that's the case. Because what this is intrinsically is so far removed from anything that could possibly be held to be problematic, and obviously so, and explicitly so, and demonstrably so, that you have to really, if you see that, you have to work really hard to come up with a problem. I mean, you have to really manufacture it very, very carefully. With great effort, and perseverance.
It's funny you say that, because I actually have recently started chairing a meeting in Arizona at this detox center. And it's like 35 people that are only there for a day to 3 days detoxing. And and I'm sitting with them, and some of them are just like kind of sleeping and roll over, and then I'm having exchanges with them, and they're coming up to me after and asking, and I'm experiencing something very like when I would have in the past said, wow, this is tough, this is bad, I don't want to be with these people. I'm having an amazing experience of them and myself in it.
Sure, yeah.
It's kind of fun.
Yeah. I mean, everything is astounding.
Yeah.
And when you see that that's the case, then you get to really enjoy your experience.
It's kind of interesting, because the more that you're in that astonishment, it's like I don't know who that person is, and it's so great, because it's like
totally.
It makes it so much more enjoyable.
Yeah.
wow, who's having so much fun?
Yeah. I mean, we define our own identity into existence in an unintentionally problematic way. And when we discover that we aren't that, and we don't know who and what we are, all of a sudden the problems that were implicit in what we were previously defining ourselves to be turn out not to be there, and how nice.
How luxurious.
Yeah.
It's like what part of us ever thought they were ours?
It's like, who thought that up?
Well, it's a snowballing of confusion that can seem to have persistence and, arguable, truth and apparent objectivity. But then when it doesn't stand up to scrutiny in the light of what experience actually is, and then you see, oh my God, I've been thinking all this stuff and it's just a lot of hot air. And when I go look at what's really here, I just can't find evidence for it. You just can't find it. It's not that that's not a viable interpretation. It's just an interpretation, and you can come up with as many interpretations as you want. And they're all just interpretations. They're all stories, And in the face of the obvious fact that this event completely transcends any simple interpretation, you just get that there's no point coming up with these interpretations because they don't address anything actual. It's like you ask someone, "What did you do yesterday?" "Well, I did this, I did that." It's like bullshit. You did not. You did. You can't say what you did. You had this astounding flow of inconceivable, experience with just inconceivable vibes and flavors and nuances every instant, and you collapse that down to to a group of sentences that are supposed to be comprehensive. It's an absurdity. Even what your experience is like in one instant couldn't be captured in an encyclopedia worth of words. It's too subtle. It's too nuanced. It's too much. It's too just. There's so much richness in experience. It's so obvious. There can be no one-to-one correspondence between anything you say or think, no matter how precise and elaborate, and the density and multidimensionality of actual experience. It's like art critics or something, It's like, well, I looked at the painting and, to me it was this, that, and the other. It's like, give me a fucking break, There's no way you can collapse a painting down to words, I mean, any painting, just a scrawl by a kindergartner, who cares, right? It just doesn't, it's apples and oranges. It just does not compute. It's a multidimensional experience, that is not finite. It's not, it just can't be done. And seeing that fact basically disentangles you, spontaneously extricates you from getting so caught up in all of these narrations that humans are so programmed to put so much importance on. Hi, how you doing? Who are you? What'd you do yesterday? What do you do? It's like, what do I do? What do I do?
When? Where? So when, like this, we've been talking about recognition, observation. Let's talk about observation. You look out, what is often just talked about as like the human condition, observation of the human condition. And let's say there appears to be like a whole group, of like people and corporations that pursue financial security, or and we characterize it as such. Sure. And then, make judgments about that or act in certain ways according to those observations or the amount of agreement they've gone into around it.
Sure.
So that too is completely same absurdity, right? As
entirely.
Paper.
Entirely. Absolutely not a shred of objective truth there. Because it's all defined into existence. A corporation isn't a corporation. It's a continuous flow of space-time. And where do you divide one portion of space-time from another? I mean, is if you talk about, an oil company, are you talking about the air that's in the buildings that the employees are breathing? Are you talking about the employees? Are you talking about their genetic structure? Are you talking about their genetic history? Their mitochondrial history that dates back to, the earliest pre-humans in Africa and all. I mean, it's like you can't separate. I mean, as soon as you demarcate anything, like talk about a corporation or a person or an event or a day or something, you're supposing you can take this entity like a cookie cutter and cut it out and separate it from its milieu as a differentiable entity. It cannot be done. You can't extricate anything from its milieu because its milieu is it. Talking about you outside of the context of your history, outside of the context of your society, outside of the context of your family, outside of the context of the biosphere, outside of the context of the history of life on Earth, is completely meaningless because you are one with it. It makes you, and you are an expression of it. So you can't, when I talk about you, I'm talking about the history of life on Earth. Because you're a continuum. It's like when you talk about a wave, you're talking about the ocean. Because there ain't no dotted line where the wave stops and the ocean starts. The ocean, the wave is the ocean. The ocean is the wave. It's just arbitrarily designating a portion of a whole system as if that portion was a separate part. And it isn't. There are no separate parts. Nothing exists in isolation. Even galaxies interact. I mean, and yet with our language we talk about things and actions and corporations and people and this. Every time you name something, every time you put a noun on something, you're subliminally claiming that it exists as some degree of an autonomous entity, and that can't be found in reality because experience is not separated from itself. You experience, at this moment, you experience your whole field of experience. You don't experience separate people and chairs and rooms. And we can put names on those things, but those names are arbitrary. They're like Post-its, imaginary Post-its you stick on your experience, which is as if there was a separation. It's like taking a picture, a photograph, and saying, oh, look, this is so-and-so, and this is so. They aren't there. They're patterns of light on a piece of paper. You have lightness and darkness, and you can't separate one from the other. This is the nature of reality is that it is not. It can't be cut into pieces meaningfully, and yet we pretend that it can be with our analysis, which is why the analysis is completely erroneous because it excludes too much.
I just wonder, what is the difference then of, so as we sit here and you speak, it seems like obvious, recognition, or I won't use the word knowing like you said before, but just of, yes, I'm in agreement with it. I'm flowing with it because it makes sense to every cell, whether it's mind or eyes or whatever.
Sure.
And so, again, when I sort of then look out to another condition, like a political party or whatever, I know what you're saying about if you take the noun off, there does still seem to be these waves of agreement, of philosophies,
sure.
That affect things a lot.
Sure. Well, there is apparent semantic participation, where you have a group of like say computers that are all hooked up to the internet. They're all running. They all speak, HTTP, and so they all can read the same website. So it's basically a network. And you could say, oh, they're all brainwashed into the HTTP protocol, but it's not like that. It's just that they are functionally keying in the resonance of a certain semantic code, a certain information code, which is the same thing that humans do. So you get a political party, and they're all, oh yeah, we're all for this, we're anti-abortion, and we're this, and we're that, and we're pro this, and they all say the same words back and forth to each other, thinking they're in agreement. But just because you're saying the same words doesn't mean you're in agreement. Because again, what each person is a whole system embedded in the whole system. And so what they mean by anything is their particular focus of the meaning that is derived from their entire life experience, which is always unique. So one person's being anti-abortion, another person's being anti-abortion. They may use the same words, but they're actually talking about two different things because they have two different experiences, because they're two different points of focus within the same system. So again, you have this superficial, you have these apparently semantically created systems that seem to have an internal harmony based on these semantic assertions, where there's no actual harmony, there's no actual agreement. It's a superficial agreement. It's like a tribalism. It's like if you're wearing the same clothes as everyone else in your tribe, then you're a member of that tribe. But it's only superficial. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't make you actually not you. And you are not you discretely. You are you in the context of your place in the whole universe, which comes with. It makes you you. You're you because you are where you are in all the universe, and it's all one system. And someone else is who they are, different than you, because they're who they are and where they are in the context of the whole universe that comes with them. Like each wave in the ocean is exactly where it is as a resonance because of the resonance of the whole ocean. And they aren't actually separate from the ocean, but they are unique and individual in their energy expression because of their different location, let's say. And you can't say what location is, so even talking about that isn't precise, but it's a way of trying to indicate this relationship. So it's easy to have these apparent systems, social systems and things, that aren't actually coherent either with themselves and aren't actually discrete with things that they're apparently excluding.
So to seemingly try and disrupt it isn't even possible because it's disruptive.
Well, but disrupting it would be just more of the same system expressing itself.
Mm-hmm.
So the existence of corporations and political systems and individuals and people who are supporting them and people who are against them and the antagonism and all of that is all just an oversimplified narration of the universal forces doing themselves, playing themselves out, which is all that's happened. It's like watching the waves in the ocean saying, oh, look, that wave's getting bigger, that wave's getting smaller. It's like, yeah, but the wave's not really getting bigger, the wave's not really getting smaller, it's just the ocean moving. And the same thing here. Reality moves, and everything that happens is reality moving. And we can think of it in terms of all these elaborate descriptions that we humans like to do, but again, the descriptions are inaccurate because they're partial. They over-partialize and they ignore everything. You can't talk about what any part's doing without looking at what the whole's doing. It's just meaningless. It's not actual. I mean, you can do it, but it's just it's in fantasy. It's not in actuality because actuality doesn't work like that. Actuality works as an integrated whole.
Can you describe the whole?
No, it can't be described. It's inconceivable. It can't be thought. It can't be described. It can't be captured in words. But you don't need to think it because you are it. So you have direct access to it through your being. That's why it can be seen, but it can't be said. It can be known, but it can't be described. It can't even be indicated. Except very vaguely and metaphorically and poetically, like we play with here.
Seems like from your sample.
Which sample? I'll be right back. You
Okay.
can talk. I can hear you.
Oh, it seems like your example of the ocean and one wave's getting bigger and the other wave's getting smaller is kind of like you can not that you can get a read on some kind of directionality.
Well, you can claim to, but again, that's microanalyzing something which is essentially not micro. I mean, talking about this wave and that wave, there aren't any waves. Talking about waves in terms of that example is just arbitrary assertions about the ocean. There's no waves, there's just the ocean. And there's actually no ocean, there's just the Earth. And there's actually no Earth, there's just the solar system. There's actually no solar system, there's just a galaxy. So when you talk about the behavior of a particular wave, you're actually talking about the behavior of the galaxy. Because it's all one system. And then you talk about this wave versus that wave, you're talking about the galaxy versus the galaxy. Because that's what it really is. Let's say. And even of course that's inaccurate, but it stretches the example.
Even within that, if one part of the galaxy is getting bigger and one part of the galaxy is getting smaller,
sure.
Doesn't that give us information?
Sure, but it's all information. It's all profound information, but it's not discrete information. It's not information that can be quantified into chunks that you can then assemble meaningfully. It's a holographic soup of profound transcendental meaningfulness. I'll show you there. You're a human being.
And it seems like it ought to be able to be quantified.
Go for it. No one else has been stopped by the fact that it can't be. Don't let that hold you back. Have at it. You know. Slice and dice.
So what do you mean when you say sure you're a human being? What do you mean by a human being?
Well, it can't be said what it means. It means that
But it does these things.
all of reality, paradoxically, shows up as that. All of reality, paradoxically, shows up as this. This is different than that, but this is all of reality, and that is all of reality. Like this wave is different than that wave, but this wave is actually all of the ocean, and that wave is actually all of the ocean. Because if you follow the wave down, what do you find? The ocean. And there's no dividing line. It's not like the wave is here and the ocean's here and there's like a zipper, you know. It's not like that. The wave is just a name for a portion. It's like if I start talking about my left index finger, I'm really talking about my body. Because this is an extrusion of my body. It is my body. Right? But we have this if you can designate something, there comes the sort of semantic implication or assertion that it's a separate entity. But systems don't work like that. You know, it's meaningless to talk about my finger without talking about my body, because they're one and the same. The finger is an outgrowth of my body. You know, it wouldn't be here without my body, and the way that it is directly the way my body is.
So I get that concept, but what I was picking up on was when he was saying, well, I do this, and I said, sure you do, because you're a human being.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so the tendency to characterize.
See, being a human
Sure.
being is not a pattern.
Like what, I'm asking like.
But it can't be said the way it can't be ultimately said what that is. But reality expresses itself as a human being in the behavior of an obvious human being. Reality expresses itself as a piece of oak that's been made into flooring in the behavior of a piece of oak that's been made into flooring. The same system is doing that as it's doing this.
Just doing this thinking?
Of course.
Characterize it?
Sure. As a human being. But the piece of oak in the floor is probably not characterizing and thinking. It's doing what pieces of oak and floors do. But it's an expression of the same system. It's like humans have babies and rose trees have rose hips. It's not that there's an equivalent there, but because humans and rose bushes aren't equivalent, but they are expressions of the same system. Just like your hair is an expression of your body, just like your eyeball is an expression of your body, but they don't look the same and they work very differently and do different things. But the nature of what this is it expresses itself in inconceivable diversity of apparent subsystems, right? Each of which are very different functionally and in every characteristic and in every way. You have suns, you have planets, you have plants, you have humans, you have atoms, you have anything. All these is conceivable abundance of apparent subsystems, each of which is unique and different and works different, has different characteristics, and each of which is completely an integrated expression of the totality. So you have this paradoxical or difficult to conceive of situation where things can be very, very, very different in every way, and functionally and substantially in every way, and still be expressions of exactly the same thing.
So you're getting a hit on the totality when you perceive.
You never see anything but the totality. You look at this fingernail, you're looking at my body. I look at you, I'm looking at the universe. I look at this beard, this cider
But
bottle, I'm
there
looking
are
at the
times
universe.
when you can kind of feel connected as one with all.
Well, whether you feel it or not, you are. I mean, it's not that you're connected; you're also disconnected. Connection connection and degrees of connection is more partialization of something which transcends that, or includes all possible and conceivable actual modes of that. You can't. There's no point trying to simplify it. No point trying to get a handle on it. No point trying to say, "Oh, is it this or that? Is it this way or that way?" It's like, no.
Well, there's no goddamn point.
That's it. No point. And what is it when there's no point? What do you have?
No
What doesn't
point.
go
I don't
away?
know.
You have
No
this.
point. Huh?
You have this.
Everything.
Whether there's a point or no point, you have this. So don't worry about the point. Worry about this. Is this one or many? Is it big or little? Does it have parts or not? You know, are any of those questions even vaguely relevant, let alone meaningful? You know, but nonetheless, there is this.
What is a meaningful question?
And there are none. I'd have thought you'd figure that out by now.
There is a meaningful question from the
All right.
I think that you've already.
Oh yeah, it's gone.
So it's gone. It's gone.
Ask it again.
Tell him to ask it again.
Hello.
Gus is asking a question.
Okay. You know, we have a scan right here on our readout
Well,
apparently.
the problem is we have chipmunks on the line, and then
Yeah.
they say that there is clicking as well, alien interference, and then there's quite a big time lag. So
There's a time delay.
So, Peter,
Yes.
so the fact that we care personally about seeing reality
Yes.
more clearly,
Right.
that's reality caring.
Absolutely. Reality is doing that.
But at the same time, does reality, in the big sense, really give a shit if we see or not see it? It doesn't seem like.
Of course it does. We wouldn't be doing it. But
Okay.
characterizing it as that is an oversimplification.
Yes.
You can't know what it's really doing. And characterizing it as
Yeah.
seeing or not seeing or wanting to see is fine as far as it goes, but you can't say what's really going on. You can say it looks like as if it's that to me, but it may be something entirely different. It may be analogous to something like reality scratching its left toe. You know, that looks like all of human striving throughout history. You know, I mean, that's obviously silly, but that illustrates that there's no way to get a sense of proportion on what event is, what's transpiring in an event, what it's doing, how it's doing it, what it means. We can see what we feel about it. It seems to be.
continuum, or here and now, or both.
None of the above, or all, none slash all of the
Or
above.
indescribable.
Indescribable. What this is intrinsically is transcendental. What I mean by that phrase is that it is not capturable in any finite terms, which is not to exclude any finite terms or include them. It's just I don't know. You know.
Uh-oh, he's stumped.
Gus says, ha.
Peter, I have a question. So I've been exploring noticing lately more than
Good.
I have been, and I kind of feel like it's noticing is a lack of coherence,
Yes.
and that's fine. So I connect anything,
Uh-huh.
connect the dots anymore.
Uh-huh.
But is there anything more to noticing than that, or I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. But at one phase, noticing will predominantly seem as a lack of coherence, mainly because you are leaving behind the coherence that you may be habitually used to imposing on your experience through a subliminal interpretation. And as you go with your experience more profoundly or more intimately or beyond that, then it may feel relatively incoherent in terms of the way it's used to feel, because you're no longer imposing your own conceptual coherence on it. But that's just a phase. Because what it is what it is, and what it will seem to be will go through many, many, many different phases of unfoldment as you sort of let go of your previous way of being with it. It will all of a sudden it will have a different sort of a feeling tone or different sort of implications, and you'll be with it in that guise or in that light until the unfoldment moves on, so to speak.
yeah,
Because there's no end to the limit. There's no limit to the degrees of subtle ways you can take this as being. And at first we're heavy-handedly taking it in terms of our coherence and our worldview. And when we leave that behind, it's like, whoa, all of a sudden we're in this strange openness and relative incoherence and all of that. But there still will be various more subtle and more subliminal ways of holding and presuppositions that are down there, which will be in play. And you will again eventually move beyond those as the noticing progresses and so on.
yeah, it's interesting how whatever it is just keeps trying to go back to coherence. It goes back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting how that just keeps going on.
Yeah.
And I keep reminding myself we're noticing that there is no coherence.
Yeah, and exactly, because again, you may have a long habit of relating to your experience in certain terms, and there's a familiarity there and ease there. It's like a horse finding its way to its stable kind of thing. Sort of a mindlessness, and it's easy to do, and so there's a tendency to do that, to reassert that, because it's familiarity.
Yeah.
But in the face of noticing, in the face of direct experience, the direct experience will transcend that way of holding it and will automatically seduce you or entice you into a more direct way of being with this, which will transcend the old framework. And again, the habitual way may reassert itself, but eventually noticing wins, because it's real, it's true, it's actual, whereas the old way of holding it is just clearly revealed to be a sham, to be imaginary, to be a fantasy that's not based on, it's not supported by actual objectivity. In other words, it'll prove to be an old hypothesis, for which it'll turn out to be there's insufficient evidence, and so you'll eventually abandon it. Unless you're a really, dogged, crazy person, in which case you'll go back to your insanity and damn the torpedoes. Screw you! I'm taking my way. I'm right even if I'm wrong. And a lot of people do that. I mean, everyone does noticing spontaneously all the time, whether they acknowledge it or appreciate it or not. Everyone finds themselves in just a little moment where they're outside their framework, and they might think, oh, I spaced out, or I was daydreaming, or I was tripping, or I was dozing off, or I was whatever. But most people devalue that and then go right back to the power stance of, oh yes, now I've got it. Now I know where I am. Now I'm back in my world. Now I'm on top of things.
But you have to be comfortable in that. I think then you're comfortable in a constant state of disorientation. You're not connected to anything.
Yeah. Well, you can learn to, because it's also empowering. It's not just uncomfortable or disorienting. It's also, it has a let's call it a plus side. It's empowering. It's liberating. it enables a greater degree of spontaneity. It enables a greater degree of spontaneous participation and intelligence.
It's highly
You're
functional.
much highly functional. You become
More so.
freer of formula and more responsive to instantaneously to new information. So so in general, in the long run, it's a no-brainer. It's very seductive because your life actually, on a moment-to-moment basis, on a practical basis, your life actually kicks way up. It ramps. It's a big improvement. It's like, hey, I'm well rid of all that orientation because it was just a boat anchor. It's like being well rid of a boat anchor. It's like, wow, now I can move.
Well, that orientation is like having a map that's not representative of the territory at all.
Exactly.
And you're thinking it is, and you keep bumping into things that aren't on the map.
Yeah, for sure.
Trying to connect the dots. Yeah.
Do you include deja vu in that as just a kind of a terminology?
Sure. I mean, you can use any terminology you want because, again, terminology is only indicative. It doesn't really define anything accurately. And any experience is real experience. So deja vu is real experience. It's not really deja vu. That's the way of defining something as being something. And what it actually is can't be said.
Yeah.
But anything that happens is real. I mean, it's real experience. And the question is noticing that it is real experience and noticing that it is ungraspable in terms of defining it or holding it to be anything definitively. Experience is slippery. It's multidimensional. It's infinite. It's trippy. And all of our ways of holding it or defining it in terms of what's happening or how it's happening is just so heavy-handed and brutish and pathetically stupid. It's inaccurate. It's imbecile. I mean, well intentioned. We aren't being stupid on purpose. When we're using that mode, we think it's a good way to go. But when you get how, God, this is not really like that. This is just not really like that. And so, approaching it in those terms is hampering yourself. You're cutting yourself off from being with it so much more multidimensionally and so much more intelligently.
So Peter, you mentioned earlier, so there are phases of noticing and unfoldment.
Well, we can say that. It's not. That's a fine way to look at it. It's not necessarily literally true, but it seems as if there is. It seems as if there's phases. It seems as if there's kind of quantum jumps. It seems as if there's sort of a vacillation back and forth between your current cutting edge and your previous more established mode. All of those, you can say that it seems as if that's the case, progressively. But again, you can't really get a handle on what any of that actually is, or even if it's true. But it's not untrue that describing it in those terms can be useful.
It seems so, I don't know whether it's the words that you can't articulate anything, ironic or paradoxical or something. The mind is constantly trying to define and describe and characterize quite unintelligently.
Sure, yeah. But again, that's the nature of being a human, is we have these minds and these personalities that have these dominant modes that are semantically oriented, and yet we also have a profound assimilative intelligence which is completely irrational and nonlinear and not limited to semantic functioning. And they coexist. And, historically, most of us have been seduced by the semantic mode and just heavy-handedly with that, except for maybe some people who are more artistic or creative or who are just sort of on the sly closet, geniuses or whatever. But we have these other modes that are sort of unsung more or less by popular culture, but which we can have access to. We don't need to be hampered by the semantic portions of our functioning, the limitations of that. And you don't even need to stop doing it, because that exists in the context of this other, much more open, much more free associational, much more non-linear, irrational approach to experience.
So it's almost like you can just observe that habitual pattern.
Yeah, sure. And that's fine. It's useful in its own terms.
Yeah.
If you want to take money out of the bank, it's useful to know how to fill out the slip. It's useful to know how to talk to the teller. All this stuff is fine in its place. It's just a particular mode. It's like a particular code that you can employ. But you don't need to think you are it. You don't need to think that that's your only interface with your experience. Even though we're sort of brainwashed to think so by our current culture, but that's just not true. If you have the wherewithal to notice otherwise, and then you can avail you, so you can make that leap and take advantage of your own transcendence, your own nonlinearity, your own genius, your own actual present intelligence, which is astounding and inconceivable.
It's funny when we go back to, like when you're saying it's highly functional. Just thinking about, I was in conversation a couple of days ago with a guy who was interviewing me about job, and he said, well, what's your relationship to birds, right? And what immediately came to me was...
They're delicious with cranberry sauce and gravy.
What immediately came to me was like this image of, like if I really thought deeply, or if I just was deeply with it for a second, I was like, oh, the first book that I read that really like opened my awareness or expanded was Jonathan Livingston's Sequel. And I said, and from that point, I've always wanted to be a bird. I wanted to fly, be free, and it's just stayed with me through my life, And so I'm like kind of somewhat excited and thinking, wow, I didn't even know I ever did that.
Sure.
And yet like he's wanting to. I'm thinking now he wants to know if I know what a spectacled eiger is and the fact that they're endangered, and so it once again goes back to that, my perception that society is. Wants me to know things linearly.
Yeah. Sure.
And I don't. What I wanted to do was talk about flying.
Sure. And that's fine. And so, but in some contexts, you may be excluded from a certain game structure because you are measuring up to the gameplay pattern you're supposed to.
It's happening every year.
But that's okay because there's lots of there's a whole lot of different games, and there are people who are less limited and who appreciate inspiration and higher functionality, and or who will interface with your established modes of acknowledged knowledge and so on too. So it's just that's just sort of the luck of the draw in terms of the expectations in the situation.
Yeah.
Why don't we have a little break? And so we'll be back in 15 minutes or so, online people. And online and back in MP3 land.
This Justin TV is currently overloaded now.
Works for me.
I was mentioning earlier that I was dealing with a detox center, but I happen to, addition to all the environmental work, the stuff I do, but I happen to spend a lot of time around people with addictions and that. And I'm kind of curious if your, your view of just that kind of whole world of addiction and obsession and compulsion and the need to sort of, it almost seems like not stop feeling.
Well, it's just a mode of functioning that seems to be relevant to some people at some time. And like any mode of functioning, it has its value and its purpose, which is inconceivable. It's a mode of experience that some people go through, which is no doubt an intrinsic part of their nature, their process. When we qualify it as this or that, but it's basically inconceivable.
It's inconceivable.
Yeah, it's unanalyzable. Whatever theories we have about it, no one's gotten to the bottom of it. No one ever will, because it's basically just human functioning, which is intrinsically inconceivable. And like all human functioning, it ultimately leads to self-realization. With an accent possibly on ultimately.
I was just going to say that, including death. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's an interesting phenomenon. I even as I observe that phenomenon in myself of obsession or compulsion or it's from an energetic perspective. It's just
Sure.
It's an interesting phenomenon.
All modes of the way this works, all this apparent present energy system works, are endlessly fascinating and revelatory, and ultimately reveal it itself, because they all reveal its inherent infinity, its inherent transcendence, its inherent inclusiveness of its own nature.
I have a question here, Peter.
Yeah.
Someone's asking how or why did you get into this field of interest?
Can't answer that question. I have no idea.
Nature.
Someone else told him that they could find out on your webpage.
Oh, good. I'm glad somebody knows. I better go read my webpage and see why I did. Actually, I reread my webpage for sort of quality control. I hadn't visited it in a few months or something. And it's pretty good. It pretty much says everything I have to say. Not really much point in coming to these meetings.
I
Or
was just going to say, everything else is repetition, right?
yeah, just read the webpage and do the math.
We come for the real live experience.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, me too.
you get that on the
Yeah.
web too.
I mean, like, that's,
When are you not ever getting the real life experience?
yeah,
Yeah,
What?
good one.
that is true. However,
Keep
it
telling
does
ourselves
appear,
these
it
silly
does appear
things.
that sometimes the cells are open and hearing it,
Yeah, no,
but
totally.
other times they're not. You know?
Totally, yeah. It's amazing the way this works.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's endlessly dynamic, endlessly unresolved, endlessly unstable, endlessly opening to itself.
I mean, there's often been laughter and astounded at even some teachers where that have said the same thing for like 20 years, and then there's this day I go, oh my God, I got that. In a whole different way.
So this person's now reading your webpage and says that he gathers that Pino Chirula had a big influence on you.
Who?
It seems to be implicit in the web page.
It needs
Oh, right,
I'm
right.
reading Peter's website.
It's kind of a fun loop. They're commenting on us and we're commenting on them.
Noise in the system reaching resonant modes, resonant levels.
Yeah.
Especially when Whitney Houston joined us the other night. Yeah.
So if everything like is, you know, if it was as it is, it's constant unfoldment and
Mm-hmm.
unknowingness and openness, and if I'm living that way, or when I'm living that way, or as you're living that way, do you also experience like, you know, the things that would, oh, you know, I don't like to sleep with the light on, or I don't want the music to be this, or this would resonate to me,
Right.
or not. I mean, do those things, do you see those just as habits, or do they change, or do they, what's your, you know, how do you perceive those things, and do you go, that's just me, I don't like to sleep with the light on? You know?
Well, it can't be pinned down what it is, because what all of it is ultimately transcendental and unanalyzable. So any phenomena, no phenomena is excluded, but no phenomena is definable either. I mean, you can't get your head around it. And what anything actually is infinite and transcendental and ungraspable. So preferences aren't preferences. Preferences is a name, is a designation for something inconceivable, as is any designation. Reality is what it is. Human functioning, the actuality of it, is what it is. And what that is can't be said. And what it actually is completely transcends all our ideas and understanding about what it is. But having said that, everything constantly morphs, everything constantly develops, things come and go, things unfold, you know. It's but there's, you know, I mean, if I extrapolate the gist of your question, I don't think there's some ultimate degree of unfoldment that approximates some plain vanilla state of non-identityness where you're sort of a zombie in the corner, not giving a shit about anything and not experiencing anything, and it's sort of all just sort of pure white, pure vanilla, pure, you know, whatever. I think, you know, from available evidence, the very nature of this is to unendingly specify and differentiate within itself, fractally, and just constantly sending out new apparent degrees of specificity, that each of which, of course, are infinite and transcendental. So it never limits itself, even as it endlessly moves into, you know, new terrain. So, and I think that what we think of as our experience is just an exemplification of that, and I think it's unending.
Yeah, I wouldn't anticipate that it would lean towards zombiness. It's just the opposite. I'm just wondering, you know, if it could move me to a place where it doesn't matter whether it's light or dark or loud or quiet.
Well, it tends to move more into a condition like that, but that doesn't mean that necessarily that preferences cease. The mattering may fall away, but that doesn't mean the preferences fall away. You know, you may get to a point where you really prefer A instead of B, but if A is not available and B is there, it's like, oh, okay, cool. As opposed to, oh shit, this ruins my day. What am I going to do? This is terrible. You know, because you have more of you definitely develop more of an appreciation that everything is intrinsically valuable and luscious in its own right, even in the face of preferences. There's not an either or there.
Even pain.
Sure, of course. I mean, I definitely prefer to avoid pain, but if pain comes, That's cool. Pain is a trip. Pain is fascinating. It's an amazing dimension or range of dimensions of experience. You know.
But pain isn't really pain, right? I mean, pain.
Well, that's the point.
Pain is what we define it as, but really it's just the radiant energy that's displaying in a different
exactly
context.
And as radiant energy, it is intrinsically transcendental and intrinsically a gateway to infinity, to infinite unfoldment, to more and other, unendingly. You know, and when you see that, then you avail yourself of it, and it becomes no different than any other experience, which is particularly what it is, but is also a doorway to infinite more and other. To sort of collapse it to a formula.
I have a question. Jeff, can you
Yes.
just move a little bit to the left, then I can see clear a little bit. Is believing
Is that what you meant?
not believing, would you say that is the same as seeing?
Not necessarily. Believing and not believing are both modes of this, of course,
Right.
and they're not an either or, and they're not you're either believing or you're not believing either. There's an infinite range of subtleties of belief, and the very nature of this is to generate subtleties of belief, or let's say degrees of subtleties of belief, so it can be more or less subtle, or more or less unsubtle. And all of that is intrinsically a seeing in one sense. In another sense, all or any of that can be seen as it is, or it can be recognized as such.
Because what my reference, if there is a reference, is that when I see something like now, like if I see that chair, it's not really a chair.
Right.
If I see, something, some object or some person, they're not really a person, and that's not really an object.
Right.
And so I have that, I don't believe anything anymore.
Right.
But at the same time, I don't even know where I'm at, but I'm not believing like I used to believe.
Sure.
And so.
So that's seeing. That's seeing the way you used to believe, and that's seeing the way that does not accurately apply. And that's being with whatever condition, whatever way you're being with it now in an open-ended way that you either aren't or have as yet to define or yet to pin down, whatever.
But eventually it's pin downable.
No, never pin downable, and yet we progress to ever.
Not pin downable in a conceptual state, but kind of you're there with it.
Well, you can come to understand things more and more subtly, progressively, forever. So it's not a matter of ultimate pinning down so much as a degree of a more profound pinning down than you may previously have realized. That will no doubt be superseded one day by a further degree of pinning down than you had previously realized forever.
A convoluted way to describe that.
I got it.
Good.
Glad to hear it.
Good convolution.
There's no pinning down.
So it's knowable.
Yeah.
It's always knowable, it's always known, but there's no final way of knowing it. So it's known in arbitrary ways, including degrees of partiality and open-endedness that are themselves undefinable. So it's basically completely open-ended, but it's definitely knowable. It is known. Experience itself is a knowing, is known. It's intrinsically known.
But it seems like the depth of knowing it even more depthfully, blah, 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 seems like you get to know it better.
Yes, sure, arguably.
And
But ultimately,
what rung? It's like.
but ultimately, you discover that
Whatever wrong
at a
is
certain
okay.
at a certain phase, it seems like more. Oh, this is more. I'm getting deeper. This is more. I'm getting deeper. But eventually, you realize that it's an infinite ladder with infinite rungs that way and infinite rungs that way. And what's really the difference about being 30 rungs farther that way or that way, or a billion rungs farther that way or that way, or a billion squared rungs farther that way and that way? Because you're still in the middle of the ladder.
There's nowhere to go.
But then
It's just
isn't
different views of the same thing. And you ultimately learn that no view is actually superior to any other view.
But isn't what's intrinsically known is that it's unknown?
I'm sorry, the last?
That it's unknown.
Yes. It's unknown, but it's not absolutely unknown. Right?
It's
I mean, it's...
relatively unknown?
Well, you can't say the way in which... I mean, that's, again, you can't pin that down, can you? I mean, your experience isn't unknown. It's profoundly revealed. Is it finally revealed? Is it ultimately revealed? Well, I don't know. But it's not opaque. It's not a dullness. It's not. I mean, there's an awful lot of revelation. There's an awful lot of profundity and content that's really making itself quite known. But at the same time, it's never a final knowing. It's never like, okay, now I've got it. This is it. This is the end of the line. Now I've got the whole thing. It's never like that either. So again, you're always in the middle of, wow, I know this with infinite profundity, and there's an infinite degree to which it's unknown, and both of those are always true. So again, you get a handle on it. You can't pin it down. It's weirder than that. We try to get, whoa, is it this or that? It's not like that. It's what this is unspeakably weird. It's unspeakably slippery. Can you be with this more and more profoundly? Yes. But do you actually get anywhere when you do that? No. It's weird. It's just unspeakably weird.
Why do you call it weird?
I don't know. It's evocative.
Oh, okay. Because it's meaningless.
Sure, it's
Because
meaningless.
it's not really weird.
Yeah, no. Everything I say is bullshit. I mean, I figure you guys have figured that out by now.
Give you a heads up. Just wanna-
You don't like weird?
It's like, no. It's the one thing you've always known in your entire whole life.
And that's weird.
And when you discover that, what's weird is that you didn't see it. That you blinded, that all these concepts have superimposed themselves in the way, but they're that too, so.
And that's weird.
That seems to me the most natural thing in the world rather than weird.
It's weird and natural. Natural and weird. Naturally weird. Natural. It's weird. It's weirdly natural.
I think you need to get away from that today.
That's okay. He is weird, so that's okay. It works for him.
Naturally.
Of course.
I keep getting, what I'm aware of is every time Susan asked the question, earlier when it was around it was the connected and not connected, and now it's like there's not a chair, there's not a person. Like I just go, I mean, how does one function and live in the world? Like the
Better.
And I hear that, and it also seems counter.
Yeah. But it's not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
When you know that things are weirder and subtler and more transcendental than you're used to holding them, doesn't remove from you the facility to deal with them as if they were. When you know that language is completely inaccurate, you don't stop being able to talk. When you know that things are when you know that human ideas are pathetically, heavy-handed and stupid and one-sided, you don't lose the ability to use them.
Well, but in some ways, my experience period of times is that, like what I would have done practically, like if I would go over and I'd use a hammer to do that nail, and now I've just seen that that's not a nail, and it doesn't need to be hammered,
You still put a nail in the wall and hang up a picture.
It doesn't need to be.
Stop you from
It doesn't need to be, but it doesn't stop you from using the hammer or not. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just leave the nail there, and that's cool too. And people who are bothered by that are bothered by that one way or the other. And people who don't give a shit don't give a shit, and it all plays itself out as, I mean, it's all the same old, same old.
I guess that there's some unusual or unspoken like that I won't be able to be practically.
But this is the point, is to see that rationality is not functionality. Our functionality does not come from our ability to be logical. It does not come from our ability to think. It does not come from our ability to speak. Our functionality comes from our innate ability to be functional. Some people have it more than others, or in different ways than others, regardless of their abilities in other areas. There are some people who can speak very well and be very reasonable, but are very dysfunctional. And vice versa. There's some people that are very functional who can't talk their way out of a paper bag. Because functionality is a spontaneously present. Some people can just get things done. They can make things happen. They can function in the real world, whatever that happens to look like. And it's not dependent upon thinking. It's not dependent upon being logical. It's not dependent upon your verbal skills or whatever.
But there can even be dysfunction and function.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's like
Sure, that's the point. It's just a whole spectrum and range of qualities. But the important point is that functionality doesn't come from having a simplistic worldview. It doesn't come from a coherent worldview. It comes from the same place the life force comes from. I mean, where's your health come from? Your health doesn't come from your ability to think. Your health comes from where? From the life force, from that shines forth, right? And your functionality ultimately comes, it's like, where's your intelligence come from? Your intelligence doesn't come because you think. You may be able to think well, if you can, because you're intelligent, but your intelligence just shows up. It just wells forth like your life force wells forth. And functionality is like that. So functionality is not dependent upon being a certain way or approaching your experience in certain ways. Functionality is just there to the extent it's there because of who you are, what you are, the system that you are. And everyone has their own flavors and degrees of functionality in various areas, and it just comes with who they are. And again, it's not dependent upon whether they're, this way or that way in terms of their functioning. In other words, another way of putting it is conscious thought doesn't do anything. Conscious thought is not functional. It's more of a symptom of functionality, or a portion of the chain or expression of functionality, or noise in the system of functionality. But functionality is done by doing, and doing is done by, I want to take a sip of chai, I don't think about it, I reach my hand out and grab it, and I have that ability, just God-given, it happened to have that ability. So, whether I think it's a cup or I think of it as infinite radiance beyond space and time is irrelevant. I can still do this.
Maybe. Give him another beer.
Where do these people come from? Who brought her here?
They're so weird.
Always hecklers, I tell you.
kick us off and
John called me. Said I was a heckler.
Well, you are. It's your nature.
the online people are getting real.
Sorry.
Someone asked a question here. They said, "So Peter works for free beer?"
I would if there was any.
And chai.
Unfortunately, I generally have to provide my own.
Don't forget the chai.
I do work for free chai, and I'm very grateful.
There's a lot of hecklers here tonight.
Oh, yeah, well,
Good.
Everywhere.
they're online over there where they belong.
I think the whole process of noticing is ultimately leads to noticing that isn't a chair. Everything is radiant.
Yeah,
Just that
certainly.
noticing process
Certainly.
that does itself.
Yeah, certainly. Noticing leads to a progressive revelation of what this is, unendingly. And noticing leads to the noticing of unending noticing, which has always been the case. I mean, noticing it leads to the discovery that there's never been anything but. And it's a progressive and infinite unfoldment of what can't be said.
And it seems to also reveal that we're not the one. I mean, I'm not doing it all.
Sure.
I'm not doing anything. It's just kind of like
No. You're not doing anything. Nothing is being done, and yet that which is doing everything is what you are, paradoxically.
So, this one statement that you made about a month ago that is just kind of just always there now is the presence of awareness is the actual perspective of the totality of being.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty powerful.
Sure. It's not bad.
It's all about awareness.
Sure. Yeah. You can say it's all about awareness, it's all about presence, it's all about the totality of being, because they're all equivalent, so there's no need to isolate, to be biased towards one or another of those assertions. They're the same, they're statements of the same thing. It's the fact that that statement indicates it's important, and the fact transcends the statement, and transcends the elements of the statement. I mean, that statement is really just an elaborate way of saying this.
Or noticing.
Or noticing, sure.
I like this better.
This is pretty good.
Where do you put consciousness in that?
Well, you don't need to. It takes care of itself.
Do you equate it to awareness?
Well, more fundamentally, you can't find consciousness as a separate thing. You can't find even awareness as a separate thing. You can't find anything as a separate thing. There is this condition, or event, or whatever it is, and then we extrapolate that this event includes consciousness, this event includes appearance, this event includes awareness, this event. But just because we assert that doesn't necessarily mean that those things exist as any kind of discrete quantities or even exist at all. They're more like we're speculating that those things, that those words or ideas might indicate aspects of this or properties of this or components of this in some way.
It's like the wave thing. It's
Yeah.
like the wave in the ocean.
Yeah, but the fact itself includes those if they are actualities, and is itself whether or not they are actualities. We can certainly say that. I mean, you know, it's like talking about subject and object. It's talking about, you know, what we really know is experiencing, and since there is the fact of experiencing, logically we extrapolate. Well, maybe there's an experiencer and an experienced. So we take the fact and we analyze it into sort of two poles.
Mm-hmm.
But to then leap to the conclusion that, those two poles are objectively true, there has to be two poles. There has to be something experienced, there has to be some experiencer. It's a leap, because you're just going to something that you've postulated. Because the fact is not that there is an experiencer and an experience. The fact is experiencing. If that. The designating as experiencing is pretty comprehensive. And there may or may not be some polarized components of a subjectivity, an objectivity, or an awareness, a consciousness, and some degree of objectively existing energy or world or universe or something. But there doesn't need to be. So, and if there is, it's included in the experiencing. So,
Right.
So you can't leap to the conclusion
Right.
that there has to be these things just because we're assuming they're there. Because they're really only a creation of logic, a creation of analysis. You see what I mean? So we start from the basic fact of the presence of what we call experience, that something's happening. And then we suppose that we analyze it to, oh, so that has to consist of this and of that interacting or something.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not necessary. Maybe not. Maybe not. You know. And so we have all these things like awareness and consciousness and all these things that we've speculated or postulated as aspects of this and intrinsic functionalities within this, and that may or may not be separate entities or components in some sense. But all that's just speculation, and can't really be found. You can't find awareness. You can't find consciousness. I mean, where is consciousness? Right here. Where's awareness? Right here. Can you find any place where consciousness isn't? No. Can you find a place where awareness isn't? No. Can you find any place where, call it energetic apparition, isn't? No. So why assume they're separate things just because we have separate words for them and separate sort of notions, sort of like gestalt surrounding those notions? But again, this is our basic human mechanism, as we suppose we analyze things into existence by designating them and then suppose they're there and then try to figure out how they work.
And then how to get rid of them.
Yeah. Try to make sense of it. But there's only one fact, if that, which is this. And it seems to me the simplest thing is, why not just stop there? And then all these other hypotheses are fine. You can play with them as hypotheses, but you don't need to make the leap to assume that they're actualities and then try to make sense of them. They may or may not be actualities, but as hypotheses they're fine, and you can play with, well, maybe there is an objectivity, maybe there's a subjectivity, maybe I exist as a subjective entity in some actual objectivity that's in some sense separate and related to me or not, and all that's fascinating, but it's hypothesis, and it's derived from and based on this fact right here, this actuality, this. And the kind of experiential implication of just starting with this and not departing from it, not going any farther, just staying with this, there's some really nice kind of implications that come with that. There's an absolute inclusion, there's absolute spontaneity, there's various other sort of implications that just come with it, and you don't even need to analyze them or name them to get to enjoy them. I mean,
but are we doing that? I mean, in this right now. I mean, we're dialoguing, conversing, sensing, analyzing. And that's fun. I mean, and that's play. I mean, in and of itself, we're talking about this.
Sure, but in another sense, maybe no. Maybe there is no talking happening. Maybe there is. Maybe those are arbitrary labelings and designations of this. So maybe talking and not talking are just this. And so why bother to differentiate them? And I'm not saying it's not valuable, but even whether it's valuable or not is more differentiation. If it's just this and those issues don't even come up, then what? What's that like? And in what way is that any different than differentiating all these things? Differentiating doesn't actually change anything.
My observation is leaving qualifying behind and turning then just to the observation field or genesis field. And that's weird.
There goes that word
Sorry,
again.
I did that deliberately.
It's
I mean, it's beautiful.
We can get a better word for that, can't
I think.
You know,
well, it's. I mean, really,
it's the persistence.
It's very strange because you can't really begin to explore the Genesis field without, of course, reducing it to some number of poetic or clumsy qualifiers.
yes,
Because
you can.
Well,
It reveals itself as intrinsically transcendental immediately.
immediate.
It reveals itself as just,
Yeah.
There's no qualifying.
you can't touch it, you can't put your hand on it, you can't indicate it, you can't anything.
You can't hold the perceiver, in any kind of solidity, or that which is being perceived in solidity, and whatever mindscape or
There's no perceiver as a thing.
deliciousness. Well, let me play a little bit. And then jump
Okay.
in. I didn't mean for you to be depressed about it.
Well, it's creating the trinity again of perceiver, perceived, and perceiving. The perceiver itself is a perceiving. There's no perceiver. There's only perceiving.
Well, I'm looking at it without qualification.
Exactly.
Right, but that was,
Well,
yes.
that's what it sounds like when you say perceiver. And
Well, you're not
perceive.
letting me speak.
Oh,
So you're,
all right.
Yeah, this is more a listening, I guess. We can try that on. I don't know. We could say there's a attentivity, but even that's very strange because at this Genesis field of creativity or creation or listening or perceiving or whatever this is, without qualification, without conceivability, is marvelously anything or you want to say or not say about it, because it's just spontaneously spinning into view, and there's no authorship there, but there's this fantastic impulse for a word form or an impression or a pattern to be recognized or spoken about. And it seems like that is maybe an ingress to where this consciousness loves just to immerse itself in conceivability and then go off into 1,001 directions,
Sure.
like we do. So a world gets created out of thin air,
Yeah, sure.
out of nothing. And yet it has, whatever it is, or we are, has this remarkable, really truly remarkable capacity to kind of tune its attention through no willful endeavor necessarily to this field of, this Genesis field where nothing can be really locked down. And it's wave after wave of pure transcendence, because nothing's durational.
Yeah. It's intrinsically transcendental, and yet you can never depart from some degree or aspect of the urge for it to be something.
Yes.
It unendingly spins off these versions of itself or implications of versions of itself to some degree on some arbitrary level of refinement or lack thereof.
Yeah.
In the context of its unlimitedness.
Yeah.
Without departing from the unlimitedness, but it doesn't depart from that either.
Right.
So that you never get pure unlimitedness, because the unlimitedness always is in the process of spinning off of various degrees of implied limitedness.
Yeah. Right. And it's interesting
limitosity.
how playful
Limitedness.
it is, because it can do that at an unending bandwidth of either gross interpretation or subtlety, which keeps revealing and revealing and revealing. Yeah.
You never get the final version. You never get final and absolute unlimitedness.
No.
Even as unlimitedness is completely explicit and obvious and undeniable, and neither do you get final and absolute limitedness, even though limitedness is constantly, asserting itself on various levels of subtlety.
Yeah, they're both deliciously unavailable.
Yeah.
It's not false, because it's other modes of this. It is this that is asserting the limitedness.
There's nothing but limitlessness.
Well, yeah, but you can't find the limitlessness, just like you can't find the limitedness. You could say the limitlessness and the limitedness are two polar directions, but you never get to an actual unlimitedness or an actual limitation.
But limitlessness is the very being itself, the experiencing itself. Calling it even limitless is giving it a name, but because it has no limit. and therefore it can't even be limited. It can only, in a limitless manner, it is all that there is, in other words, or experiencing. You can never limit it.
Yeah, right, sure.
So to even attribute a limit of any kind, whether it's limited or unlimited, is a false attribute. It's irrelevant.
Well,
Genesis is a word that I
I
can understand a little better because it's the constant
sure.
creation.
This is the Big Bang.
Exactly.
Sure.
And how can there be any knowing of whence it comes or where it goes, or that there's any going, in a sense, of direction or anything?
Well, there's a paradoxical aspect of this, which is kind of what we're talking about in this conversation, which I also indicate in another context under the terms of specificity versus indeterminacy, which is exactly the same issue addressed in a slightly different terminology, which is the fact that, I mean, and again, talking about it as two directions or two tendencies, parallel tendencies of the way that this is spontaneously in its being itself. It shows up as an unlimited degree of specificity.
Absolutely.
Which is arguably, or you could say it's tending towards the implication of limitedness, of being this as opposed to that, for example. Even as that is exactly unlimited in every regard, while still being unending specificity.
The specificity has no duration, so
right. Because in every quality, the specificity is defeated, but in every quality, the indeterminacy is defeated, and neither is actually defeated. They coexist, and not even in an equilibrium, just as coexistent absolute tendencies that do not depart from this, and that are this is apparent intrinsic mode in this.
You're talking the
context.
Divine Trinity. Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
Pretty much.
Father.
Pretty much. But which is another way of addressing the same issue of the explicit, absolute open-endedness and infinity and transcendence of this, even as this unendingly implies versions of itself, let's say, or
now, in investigating it, it can feel like being in a wind tunnel, blowing 310 miles per hour in your face, because the force of its delicious tendency toward determinacy is huge. And
it's huge and never gets anywhere. In the face of this openness.
The Big Bang is blowing you away moment by moment. And so there's this just incredible seduction to grab any filament of it and create a universe where one finds oneself in this, kind of curious condition of perceiving or commenting or even seeking. Right? And at this same point, though it's not a point, it's just pure inconceivability. So there is no wind tunnel. There really is no breeze pushing you anywhere.
All of that completely transcends itself, even while appearing as itself. It's a fascinating, paradoxical weirdness.
Very fascinating. Because the wind tunnel effect is, it's remarkably, if not insufferably, appears to be real. But in an
it is.
It's
absolutely real. It's just itself intrinsically transcendent in the sense that it's not even that. It's D none of the above already.
So it's fun. You can't really play it as one thing against another. It's just enfolding infinitude or possibility that's always transcending whatever experience you imagine you're having of it. So it's profoundly unlimited in every iteration, though it can feel like a wind tunnel blowing you into, a universe.
The you is the Big Bang. The you is the vortex.
You is that. You be
You
dad.
be dad. So who is the
You be
you?
dad, Mama. You be dad.
Dudes. Dudes.
Technical term. You be
See that
dad.
you guys just like making something out of this, huh?
It likes making something out of itself, or
Yeah.
not.
And it's
Yeah,
not,
right.
it's not
This is what you
stop.
do.
It's
But,
obviously non-stop.
No, nonstop.
And the you know the notion of you know how does a so-called primate survive in the so-called world is just it's not really
So
relevant.
irrelevant.
It's not relevant any longer that it should even, or you know that it has remarkable functionality is like comes with, you know, it's a bonus, and if it didn't, that wouldn't suck either.
That would be it too.
Yeah, right.
Mm.
There's always this. The wind tunnel suggests always, you know, a point of
Oh, you like that one.
survivability or functionality that makes sure that I'm not at risk. It's like, no, that's the wind tunnel. You know, no
Are
problem.
in tunnel,
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. All apparent event,
Yeah,
including
struggle,
you.
achievement, survival, and failure thereof is just absolute transcendence.
yeah. Infinity moving south.
Yeah. Or not.
Or not.
Appearing
South,
to.
northeast, or west.
Yeah, just right. Of course.
Oh, it's all those directions the Tibetans love so much. What is it? In, out, up, down. You know.
And the compulsion though to make sense or have a frame of reference or a vantage point of security, or I'm going to be okay, or I'm whatever this is not at risk, is it part of that wind tunnel effect that insists on corporeal or separative being that would benefit by some, you know, positivity or security or functionality in the so-called world, and you're like, huh?
Big Bang.
Whoa.
Yeah. Always unending vague implications of
Yeah.
specificity of
Right.
of structurality.
So psychological becoming,
aren't you?
right? Psychological becoming or a sense of individuation wants or craves this kind of security, which is more of same continuity of ignorance. Just make sure it's safe.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, defines the notion of an entity.
Yeah. That then has to have, you know, a preferred boundary or outcome in the so-called future, when the wind tunnel is just taking you completely away in either one of these directions toward specificity or indeterminacy.
And then through noticing, you discover that this actual event intrinsically transcends that interpretation as a necessity.
Yeah.
And then the notion of the entity and its survival just becomes a non-issue, even as it may or may not still be a viable interpretation.
Right.
OMG.
Yeah. Yeah, the interpretation doesn't have to change. You don't have to necessarily survive the absence of it. It's just seen through.
It's an online joke.
OMFG! Exclamation point! Exclamation point!
Yeah. Well, let's go for a moment into the Toggle party.
Sure.
Oh, dude.
It's a toga party? What?
Yeah, it's
Toga.
Toga. Everybody, Toga. Right. So there's this miraculous capacity for, you know, you've used the metaphor being on the cutting edge of this genesis or creation point of strangeness.
Hmm?
But this is what I'm playing with. So what's the nature of the drilling in or the drilling down or just continuing to drop into, I don't know what else to call it, but like a kind of a profound greater degree of intimacy. It's like there's, you know, you're in this wind tunnel and you're moving against this incredible wind toward the creation point of the imagination of the wind, just to kind of like kiss the blade. Right.
But you see, there's a subtle oscillation of polarization between let's, in your wind tunnel analogy, between the force of the wind tunnel and the intrinsic transcendence of that entire event.
Yes.
And there's a very subtle polarization or oscillation between those two that actualizes it. And in Togel,
Yeah.
that oscillation is diminished until there's no polarization, and at that point, form and transcendence are experienced as one,
Yeah.
without any subtle sort of flipping back and forth,
Yeah.
which can be very subtle and very profound.
Yeah.
I mean, you can be with your experience very transcendentally and still have this sort of subtle
Yeah, sure.
flipping when there seems to still be something. There seems to still be
Yeah.
some degree of
Uh-huh.
apparent specificity, and at the toga point, you're getting to the point where those polarities cease to exist as in any degree differentiable,
Mm-hmm.
and so the form and the transcendence are explicitly
Yeah.
the same,
Yeah.
as opposed
Explicitly
to
the same.
knowably the same as a dynamic
Right.
tension
Sure. Yeah.
or something,
Yeah.
which is more the wind tunnel.
I can sense that. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's funny because it is that, but I'm not using mind to see it.
Oh no,
Can't use mind to see it.
no.
It's just
You have to
It
get.
is.
You have to find this because mind is no longer relevant as a functionality or an entity at that point because
yeah.
everything collapses.
Right. And it's become, in a sense, it's an unnecessary tool or useless tool.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
The interpreter.
Froze.
Thank you.
So if I'm like, as I'm listening to all this, it's like I have this feeling like I'm integrating it, and it's
Mm-hmm.
and like I'm knowing it's true.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I am using my mind to kind of
Sure.
build the bridge.
Sure.
And so is that flipping back and forth?
Sure. It's an aspect of it, of course. You know, because I mean, it's the subtle nature of genuine spiritual work is that it is fundamentally irrational. You know, so you get to a point where you can say something's happening here, but I don't know what I'm doing. It doesn't make any sense, and I'm even thinking it's making sense when it's not making sense or not, but there is a sort of an irrational knowing. There's an irrational connecting or integrating. I mean, but you can't even say that much accurately. All you can say is something's clicking. Yeah, this is something. There's something real here that is meaningful. That,
It's almost
yeah, whatever. And as soon as you qualify it, you're it's not that. And yet all of that comes with. All of that is, the nature of this sort of, we call it spiritual work or whatever it is. I mean, it's ultimately mysterious, but it's an actuality. It's something that you can experience and participate in, and is valuable and meaningful intrinsically. But you can never make any sense of it.
Someone online has a question. I'm not sure if it's relevant for you, but
It's okay.
he says, "What is the bottom line of your philosophy, and what are you trying to do or promote?"
I'm not trying to promote anything.
Says it sounds a bit Buddhist.
Bottom line, I'm Buddhist. It's a little bit Buddhist and it's a little bit un-Buddhist. My bottom line is that reality is reality and reality is doing itself. And that turns out to be really good news. And it turns out to be ultimately liberating in terms of the apparent problems of the individual.
Let's see if that makes them happy.
What I get from this discussion is that there's this kind of puzzle equally coalescing to a picture and equally morphing and uncoalescing right now, here, all at the same time.
Sure. And the picture isn't a picture of anything actual. And the uncoalescing isn't uncoalescing into anything actual. And yet it never departs from itself.
But isn't there an actual?
There's nothing but an actual. But it's not an it. It's a this. If it was an it, you could find it and specify it.
For me, when I think like, what is the point of? I was thinking of their question, what is the point of your work? And I was thinking, what is the point of? There's no point, and what is the point of me being here? You know, and for me, it's like to be in the field, in this field where this play is happening. And then I'm also aware that I would like to have similar perceptions of reality or this or whatever that you have, and then a way to articulate it as eloquently. And so for me, there's a point.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way of putting it, but then if you look really closely at any of that, you know, you may find you can't really pin it down.
Yeah. But that's part of articulation, isn't it?
Sure. But, you know, in a profound way, articulation is a magic trick. Because it's anything really worth articulating can't be articulated, but it can somehow, strangely and miraculously, be sort of poetically evoked, even under the guise of it being articulated, even though the articulation is actually sort of missing it, going tangential to the thing itself. But somehow it can be effective anyway. And the effectiveness is not in capturing it so much as somehow indicating it. In a profound way, the nature of actual spirituality is transcendent and is independent of a vehicle or a means or a what's the word I'm looking for? An embodiment.
Form.
It does, yeah, form. It appropriates any. It's like a Trojan horse. It appropriates any convenient form and does what it does, independently of the form. And so, you know, when the magic is popping regardless of what's being said or not, and vice versa. So it's not about eloquence or about or anything like that. It's about having that. Somehow that absolutely undefinable, absolutely transcendental spark just show up and do its thing in spite of or regardless of whatever seems to be happening. You know, and all of that is ultimately, you can't sort it out and make sense of it anyway. I mean, it's very weird to go back to drop the W bomb. Why guys.
You guys are babbling now.
Anyway, on that note, it's about quitting time. So good night, everybody.